And so what can we do to be able to occupy the mind? Well, one of the most powerful things is Qigong. And why is Qigong so powerful? Because it gives us something to do with the body that requires us to think, what am I going to do next? And so I'm going to send qi to my eyes. So that occupies my mind. I'm going to rub my hands together and place them on my heart and my belly. That occupies my mind. I'm going to lift my right hand and lower my left hand. That occupies my mind. So it gives me an experience of being free of all that complex thinking. Qigong is like a doorway. Qigong.
Hello, welcome into Chi Time, your conscious living show with me, Clara Apollo. And on this episode, I have for you a doctor of Oriental Medicine and a Qigong teacher trainer and associate producer of the Quantum Chi movie. And he's an author. He's up to all sorts. I'm talking about Dr. Roger Jahnke. Welcome to Chi Time, Dr. Roger.
Thank you so much. This is a real honor to connect with you, and I'm really excited about our time together.
Oh, yeah. It's all Sharon's fault, of course. Sharon Rose.
Sharon Rose.
Yeah. And
an advocate.
Yeah, totally. I mean, she's pulling together so many Qigong masters and mistresses, dare I say, to create the Quantum Chi movie. And you're a part of that, aren't you?
I am indeed, and proud of it. And I think that it's the time may have arrived where instead of saying it's like Tai Chi or mind-body practices from China, that we can begin to say just straight up Qigong, and people know what that means.
Wouldn't that be good? We think it's happening. Anyway, you were just going to play us a little note to open up with here, weren't you? So could you?
Yes. So I like to think of this bowl ringing as a way to segue from where we were to where we will be for our time together, with purpose and intent, with the idea of, shall we say, disassociating from the complexity of the world, knowing that it is complex, knowing that it will be complex when we return to it, but for right now, to just give ourselves a little hiatus, vacation, healing time, couple of deep breaths, just one gong.
Beautiful.
And back to you.
Well, we're all aligned now. And I find that this kind of practice of using a singing bowl or a sound, tuning forks, people use, or some kind of sound to denote your time away. That was beautiful what you said about the bridge between the busy outside world and coming into your more subtle awareness of your being, and this potential to allow yourself to be still. And it's so central to Qigong practice to give yourself permission to come into stillness. And I'd love to ask you if you'd like to talk to us a bit about why stillness is so important and so key to the Qigong and self-healing.
Nice. Yeah. Well, the concept of stillness is fascinating, going all the way back to the earliest texts on these things, Qigong being more of a ritual of the celebration of nature and indigenous cosmology, probably hundreds of thousands of years ago. And there's this phrase that just starts without being a sentence and sort of ends without being a sentence, but is this classic line, which is movement in stillness, stillness in movement. There's another one which is even more complex, which is being in non-being, non-being in being. But let's just go with the stillness part for right now. This whole idea that in our movement, we can sustain some kind of an association with stillness. And that in our stillness, there is just an immense dynamic of movement, whether that's movement of chi, movement of thoughts, shall we say, the debate between the habituated self and the witness self, or the eternal self. There's a lot going on when we are being still. And when we move, the invitation is to develop the capacity to carry stillness with us into movement. Now, I think that that's, one of the great foundational ideals of Qigong, Tai Chi, meditation, yoga, etc. And it's something that probably even the great masters and wizards are still, shall we say, cultivating the capacity to accomplish.
Well, because it's a moment-to-moment thing. You might have got it sussed at one point. You go, oh, but then as soon as you notice the stillness, whoop, there you go, you've moved.
Or you get some news or some, something in the mailbox, whether it's the new mailbox or the old mailbox, somebody says something that pulls your chain, and pretty soon you're off and, into the habituated self.
Yeah, but therein lies the challenge, as you say, to maintain that presence of stillness throughout whatever you do. And for me, I've noticed very recently, even more so, that if I allow myself to be drawn back to the stillness, particularly when it's tough, it feels like it's strengthening my ability to be able to do so. And I don't manage it all the time, but I've noticed recently when I do that, when there's a challenging situation and I just take a breath and I remember this still fortitude deep in me, some of that seems to be even stronger when I can do it in a challenging situation. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I think that's the one. It's like people say, if you're aware, you're halfway there. Well, where are we going? And what's halfway? And what's before halfway? And what's before halfway is the fact that we're all charged up and don't even know it. It's just happening as a habituated response. Whereas when we can see ourselves having a habituated response, even though it may not be the preferred response that we would be looking for as a deeply cultivated person, we're at least aware of the fact that we could become more cultivated, and we're, lifting the weights of that awareness as we go. And, I think we're all, it's one of the weird things about the word master is we get this idea that a person has mastered something. Well, I've been with lots of masters, and, they all freak out at some point. You think, well, where's the mastery now? So it's not just those of us who are, we don't have the Chinese gene and we haven't been doing this for thousands of years. It's even the people who do have the Chinese gene and have been doing it for thousands of years are all still cultivating.
Yeah, we are human, and it's the choice, isn't it? You said to have the awareness that you have a choice. That was such a big one for me, to come into the breath and take a breath before responding more than I used to. And that kind of, it gave me the power back to myself. Even in difficult situations, like, hang on a minute, if I just go outside, or sometimes I go to the bathroom and breathe. I'm talking when I was bringing up my teenage son, it was reasonably challenging. And it was like, okay, I need to break this, a bit like what you did with the gong, something that breaks the charge, to bring you back into that awareness. And
nice. And isn't that what Qigong and Tai Chi and Kung Fu, that's what those things are for, is to schedule and discipline. These are all our as teenagers, like who wanted a schedule? How much did you want discipline? And now you realize, oh my gosh, scheduling this into my life and being disciplined about it is probably the most important thing ever. And I'm finally getting to it now that I've, overcome my longing to be free of, whoever was telling me what I should be doing. I'm now telling myself. And I don't want to be shooting on myself too much, but, shooting is being pushed by a force that you don't recognize as your own. There's another thing, which is a pulling, something that pulls us forward into this, what we now know is this glorious experience of being a more cultivated person.
Yeah. And it's the getting back on the saddle. Like you said, even the Chinese masters have freakouts every now and again. Where's the mastery there? Well, the mastery is getting back on it, getting back into the discipline, remembering that, everyone falls off the horse, we're all human. It's the choice to get back on it again, isn't it?
Indeed.
So what made you get into Qigong? That's like a huge question, probably, but
yeah, and it is the classic question, and it has a great classic answer, and that is that some disruptor appeared in my life. I was unfortunate, shall we say, to lose a parent as a young person. My dad died when I was 9. However, in retrospect now, with 2020 hindsight, by the way, 2020 vision, 2020 hindsight, 2020 foresight, 2020 insight. But anyway, the experience as a younger person of losing, having a traumatic event, typically as a younger person, we go very directly into denial about these things. So I felt at the time like I was fine. If you would have asked my teachers or my parent, my mom, she would report, except she wasn't fine either. So she probably didn't even notice. But the key is that previous to the passing of my dad, I was insistent when people had asked me what I want to do when I grow up, that I want to be a baseball player. And I'm from a place called Cincinnati, and they have a baseball team, and that baseball team was doing very well at the time and so forth. But immediately following the death of my dad, I began reporting to people who would ask, and everybody asks a little kid, what are you going to do when you grow up? That I wanted to be a doctor. And when I went to medical school, eventually, pre-medical school, and I asked the question, who is the most oriented person in this medical school to the concept of disease prevention? And what they said to me was, it just blew my mind. What they said was, well, we're doctors. We don't know about that. We diagnose and treat diseases. If you want to study disease prevention, you have to, I forget what one person said, that I had to study, instead of studying medicine, I should study home economics. Do you guys have home economics? Yeah. It's like how to cook and how to sew. And we now realize that, self-care and nutrition and hydration and rest and right relationships with the people in your life, that is the foundation of what we would call the wellness movement, and what the Chinese would call yang sheng, being nourishing life and all that. So I dropped out of medical school and went into the study of literature. And the first book that we read in the comparative literature course was the Tao Te Ching. And I said, I want to be a doctor of this.
Yes. Yes, I'm so with you on that. Oh my goodness. So you went from studying medicine into literature, and then you got hit by the philosophy of nature and the Tao Te Ching and the whole mind sort of, that whole thing does to you, doesn't it? I think if you can't work out when you're reading it, you know you've got it in a weird sort of way. I think it's
Yeah. That's the best thing
poetry.
about the Tao Te Ching, is that when
Yeah.
you read it and you say, I don't get this, then that's the thing.
Somewhere you have got it, but it's not in
Yes.
your knowing mind. There's the difference between knowing with the mind and knowing with the intuition. Is it the gnosis, GNO? And I think you mentioned 2020 as well. And I think we are coming into this time more and more into a multi-dimensional aspect of self, which means that the knowing and the mind is needing to just unhook and trust the gnosis within the heart and other
Love that.
information. Yeah.
Yeah. So then eventually what happened was that I became a doctor of Chinese medicine, assuming that Chinese medicine would be like that, like the Tao Te Ching. And honestly, it can be. Chinese medicine can be like the Tao Te Ching, like, because it springs from that same that natural upwelling of wisdom from the Chinese tribes. But as Chinese medicine has made its way into the cosmopolitan era, it has adjusted itself many times over many dynasties, and it really becomes a lot like Western medicine, where the doctor says, "What's wrong with you?" And, or "What's bothering you?" And in the Tao Te Ching version of Chinese medicine, the doctor wouldn't say, "What's bothering you?" The doctor would say, "Tell me about who you are. Tell me about how you're experiencing your life." And honestly, they would say, "Tell me if you're oriented to the Tao Te Ching," because if you are, then there's a whole conversation that can happen that if a person is not associated with the body of knowledge and philosophy of the Tao Te Ching and the early philosophical insights of the Chinese tribes, then a person is more locked into the dimensional world. Whereas if a person is familiar with the Tao Te Ching, they have liberated themselves probably from the dimensional world into the multidimensional aspect of being, which you were describing a moment ago.
Yes. Dr. Roger Jahnke is here with us on Chi Time. Oh, loving this. I so knew this was going to be fun. Have you got some tea with you?
I do. I'm drinking Dragonwell from the tea fields, the former imperial tea fields of the Song Dynasty in Hangzhou, central China.
Well, cheers.
And you?
Just got a bit of oolong on here, a bit of
oolong is my
Kuan
favorite.
Yin oolong. It is. It's my staple. But we had Ken Cohen's been over here a couple of times, and he's done a tea presentation for us, and a lot of the Chinese poetry that goes with it as well, and just opening our eyes to, or our hearts to, that the energy that comes through the tea is not just what you're tasting in the now moment. There's a whole, like, where it was grown, how the sun was, how the people were feeling when they were picking it. It's like, wow.
It's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful.
Well, really, I'll say about this tea that it is harvested in the hills around the West Lake in Hangzhou, which was, as I said earlier, the imperial capital of China during the Song Dynasty. And one of the most interesting things that happened historically regarding Qigong and Qi cultivation and wisdom and all of that was that in the Tang Dynasty, there was a very difficult period with what's called alchemy, wherein the alchemical formulas were prepared by chemists and then ingested. This is in contrast to internal alchemy, where the elixir is produced within. And what happened in the Tang Dynasty is that these chemists who were trying to get the Son of Heaven to live forever, like really in the body that they had today, actually killed 6 emperors. Killed 6 emperors. And so when the Song Dynasty came in, there was a kind of a disdain for external-based alchemy, and internal-based alchemy was, shall we say, there was a renaissance in alchemy, and so he of Hangzhou is sort of like intended as a gateway to the 3 treasures of body functionality, heart-mind functionality, mental-emotional functionality, and the presence of the spirit being expressed, all in the tea.
Yes, again. Wow, I hadn't heard that. That's an
Love
amazing
that.
story, yeah. And it brings us really nicely to the tuning into the medicine within, and how that's what Qigong is to me. And I had a kind of similar story to yours. I was trained originally as a nurse, and in my nurse training, I got more and more sensitive to all the illness and disease around, and I was looking for, where's the preventative medicine here? And we're like you, they're going, well, we don't do that here. This is disease management. They didn't say that, but that's what I thought. And I thought, I can't do this anymore, because I would rather be involved with helping myself and others to not actually get the disease in the first place. And so I left and went to art college and got into rock and roll, and then had a child and got in, and then it called me back. The natural healing called me back, and Qigong came in and saved me, and still does. So I didn't realize then that it was helping me to turn on the medicine within me, and that just is like what, I have medicine within me already? It's like, yeah. And then I heard you talking about this not long ago, and I thought, oh.
Well, let's go back to the texts again. Well, first let's go to contemporary Chinese medicine. The patient comes in, the doctor says, have you ever had acupuncture before? No. We have a conversation, whether it's about symptomology or anything else that could be a part of that. And by the way, being a Chinese, my work as a doctor of Chinese medicine went for over 35 years. Clinically, a full schedule, 5 days a week for 35 years. So it's not to say that I stepped out of the clinical practice of Chinese medicine because Chinese medicine doesn't work. It was because I was just so excited about Qigong. So the patient says to the doctor, well, is there medicine in the needle? Assuming that the medicine is out there. And I would say, well, let's do it this way. I'll insert these acupuncture needles and you can just take a rest for a few minutes and notice what you're feeling. And then you tell me where you think the medicine is. And so not always, but sometimes people would say, oh, I get it. The medicine is actually in me. And these acupuncture needles are arranging the internal functional self and the internal energetic self to be able to nourish, support, enhance, up-level, refine the naturally present capacity for sustaining well-being or recovering well-being. So that's how it comes all the way into the present day, with acupuncture being a stimulus for rearranging internally present functional capacity. So then let's go back into the traditional texts from the Taoists and so forth, where the word medicine is used all the time to describe an elixir that is produced within the human system. This medicine that is naturally present within us is a part of Taoism and Taoist cultivation, and you want to call it Taoist wellness methodologies and so forth, is already there. So then what happens? Well, the qi becomes deranged or unsettled or disharmonious under the influence of all sorts of factors. In Chinese medicine, there are what are called the external factors, and the external factors have to do with weather, basically cold and heat and dampness and so forth. And by the way, in Chinese medicine, these are called evil. These are called evils. So, here in the Western world, evil means that there's a devil. In China, the word evil means just not right. And so when a person comes under the influence of cold, that's perceived as an evil. So, scary. How scary is being cold? Well, it's very scary if you're very cold and can't warm up. Then to go back to the idea of this elixir, of this ultimate elixir, let's just call it that, the ultimate elixir, sometimes called the golden elixir of longevity, which is basically sustained well-being, and immortality. What the heck is the golden elixir of immortality? Well, the golden elixir of immortality, the best phrase I've ever heard about this, by the way, we know that that the body produces new cells. We know that the body produces stem cells, and that these stem cells differentiate into brain cells and eye cells and skin cells and heart cells and liver cells. But we also know that there's a presence within us of a non-substantial aspect of being, which we would call our ideas and insights. And then there's another presence of what is even more ineffable or more difficult to describe, which is our spiritual nature. And so the elixir, the golden elixir of longevity and immortality, one of the most beautiful phrases that I've ever heard about this is that the golden elixir is nothing other than one's capacity to sustain a relationship with the aspect of oneself which cannot be destroyed and is eternal. That's big medicine.
I am so with you on this. I'm that yes, and it's. I mean, I've known the theory of it. I've worked on it a bit, and this whole link to immortality. What is immortality? It's just the aspect of you that cannot be damaged, is connected to spirit. And when we lose our bodies, we recognize how much of us has actually been that eternal presence. But with this infinity quantum qigong with Amalia recently, because being a teacher, it's like finding other people to hold space for me to do my own process is a thing. But she's just been brilliant. And it took me to exactly what you just said. And if I get a wobble, it's like, go back to that place that you know is strong and true and deep, and my internal medicine, that's what it is. So thank you for naming it as such.
Yeah, you are so welcome. And then what happens, when a person has no idea about this, when Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says, a person who has no idea about the Tao will laugh at you when you describe it. But a person who knows about the Tao will ask the question, who am I really? And is the part of myself that exists in dimensionality and time in accord with my eternal self? And as soon as I ask the question, is my local self in accord with my eternal self? It kind of depends on whether I've lost touch with the awareness of my eternal nature. And if I feel like I can be harmed, if I feel like I'm being assaulted, if I feel like somehow someone is being unfair to me, I get to ask the question, is that really true? And, the hardest answer, and this is why people really don't like it when people who are cultivated in these ideas start to suggest that our diseases are actually a function of our own natural unfolding. It's hard to hear that for a person who's in pain and wants to be able to, I don't think a person would want to be victimized, but there's also present in that same individual a longing to not be the cause of one's own suffering. And yet, if we are, this gets too deep. We should probably stay more shallow than this so that we can talk about the practical applications of Qigong and so forth, because most people are going to want to hear that because they're just breaking into the idea of I'm more powerful than I ever thought that I was. But let's just go for one moment into the deep end and ask the question, where does the world come from? And there's absolutely no evidence that the world does not come from our mind. There's no evidence that says that the world does not come from our mind. There's also very little evidence that says that the world comes from anywhere other than our mind. So what we can do is if we're inclined to do so, we can allow ourselves to drift comfortably into this, and bombs are not going off right now. We're not being robbed. We're not being assaulted. So we're in a moment here where we can lift our eyes to a higher seeing and ask the question, is the world created by me? And, nobody knows that it is or isn't. So I'm not suggesting that it is or isn't. I'm just suggesting that it's one of the things that could be. And if the world is produced by me, however that can work. And by the way, I think that you're creating a world too. So, when we talk about parallel worlds, we think, well, there's another universe on the other side of a black hole. But actually, there's another universe on the other end of this conversation. My world and your world seem to be alike, but how often have you said of someone, wow, they're in another world? How do you do that? How do you get into another world? Well, you get into another world by your perceptions of the nature of things. So I know and I'll just go all the way to the deep end by saying this one, which is my favorite idea right now. And I say this favorite idea of mine, not with any intent that any other person should believe that this is a reasonable idea. This is just me in my world. And it goes like this, and it's very forgiving. And I'm allowing myself to live in a world that is very forgiving for now. And it goes like this. Everything that you could possibly imagine and everything that you cannot possibly imagine, even those things that are unimaginable, are all happening now, including the experience that I'm having, including any experience that I could direct myself toward having by making different choices. And the punchline of this goes to the idea that it's legal, you're allowed, one is allowed and one is invited to develop a personal philosophy that liberates one from guilt. And so imagine if you actually, anybody who's listening here, this doesn't have to be true. It's just that nobody knows that it's not true. So if it's either true or not, we can investigate it as an idea. What's the possibility that allowing yourself to be free from guilt and blame would stir a way of approaching a moment, a day, a relationship that is completely different than the way that one traverses moments, days, and relationships previously?
Wow. Dr. Roger Jahnke is with us here on Chi Time, blowing our minds about the deep end of the quantum field of all possibilities, where each and every one of us create our own worlds. In which case, we have the potential to create better places to be in and not believe the media hype of fear and worry and anxiety and pain and all of that, which brings me to right back to basics, how Qigong can help us to de-stress, because de-stressing makes us poorly and it makes us a bit stupid as well. It's too much stress is just not good from so many angles, and yet there's a lot of it. I think with that anti-guilt idea, that takes a heap of stress off, and it feels to me like, you know, we've got these layers of conditionings and behaviors and stuff, and they're covering up what's actually already there, which is your innate essence of being, and we just peel back the layers. And Qigong helps me hugely with de-stressing my system, either the internal negungs or the external, like actually doing physical movements. And I wonder if you'd like to chat a little bit about the de-stressing aspects of Qigong, please.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you said, let's get back to basics here. And here's why. Because there's a set of steps that one has to climb to be able to get to the point where what we were just discussing is even admissible. And so many of the people listening will, during the last section of what we were discussing, just scratch their head and say, this is ridiculous. And so how do we get to the point where someone like yourself would give a little applause to that idea, and that I would somehow have that idea myself, given the fact that I don't have any Chinese genes and am from some place called Ohio? How do these things happen? Well, it's step upon step upon step. And the earliest step is to come to the point where one is curious, not believing something that seems unreasonable, but curious about something that seems, shall we say, distant from our current point of view. And the easiest way to accomplish that is to be able to quiet the habituated mind. So if one has ever tried to meditate and you sit down and you get still and you be quiet and think, yeah, this is going to be really the one, I'm going to get so deep into meditation this time. And then like 10 seconds later, you're making lists and you're thinking about the people who haven't apologized to you, and you think I should have a party, and then you get all tangled up in who to invite and what kind of food to have, or any other simple thing like going to the dentist. I haven't been to the dentist lately, or, you know, I should have a medical checkup, or I didn't really communicate very well with this person earlier, so I probably should get it up and do that. And so there's so much that comes thundering in. And so what can we do to be able to occupy the mind? Well, one of the most powerful things is Qigong. And why is Qigong so powerful? Because it gives us something to do with the body that requires us to think, what am I going to do next? And so I'm going to send Qi to my eyes. So that occupies my mind. I'm going to rub my hands together and place them on my heart and my belly. That occupies my mind. I'm going to lift my right hand and lower my left hand. That occupies my mind. So it gives me an experience of being free of all that complex thinking. Qigong is like a doorway. Qigong is like an early step, and different levels of Qigong are like some of the best ways to step up into a more reflective self, a self that is less distracted and able to be self-reflective. Self-reflection plus curiosity equals asking oneself the question, why did I do that? You know, why did, when she said that, why did I come back with whatever I came back with? That's self-reflection. And so then that leads us into different kinds of conversations. Because if I can react without feeling blamed in a curious sort of way, in a relationship with a person that I value, then I'm going to be able to get to know that person more deeply. They're going to get to know me more deeply. And we might even get to the point where we either agree to disagree or find ways to be able to disagreeably disagree without being aggressive and assaulting and blaming. And if we develop the capacity to free ourselves from some of the blame that we carry, which may or may not be relevant or useful, we also may find our way to be able to forgive others for some of the blame that we ascribe to them. Those are the higher levels of cultivation. If we think of the three treasures, treasure one, the body, the functionality. Treasure two, the heart mind. So if we can get the body so that it's comfortable enough to sustain the practice, then we will become reflective. And as we get to deeper levels of reflection, we can then begin to recognize the presence of our eternal nature. So it's body, mind, spirit, body step, heart, mind step, spirit step, which take us up into these higher levels of consideration and self-reflection and reflection on the nature of the world, that then take us to the point where we can say, because we were starting to talk about stress, we can say, you know, how did I get stressed? Well, I decided to be stressed. Well, no, I didn't. I'm not to blame for that stressing factor in the world. But I am to blame for taking that stressful factor in the world on as if it's supposed to make me sick or distressed. And people who get up those steps will tell you that there's no sustainable value in taking the world seriously. And therefore, there's a logic that's buried into the Qigong process, starting with simple practices that will support an individual in developing the capacity to ask the question, is this worth being stressed over? Rather than just habituatedly being stressed.
Brilliant. Is there a little process that we could go through right now for people watching or listening that would
Sure. Let's see. So we've been talking about three treasures. And so let's just stay with the three treasures idea for a moment. There's many different parts of the three treasures. We just talked about the body. Then we talked about the heart, mind, or the mental, emotional self. And then we talked about the spiritual self, which is in some way not limited to the body or the personality. The three treasures are also the earth and the sky, and whatever lies between the earth and the sky, which is living beings. And I have my picture of that over there. You have your image of that behind you. The whole concept of Tai Chi being the merging of yin and yang within ourself. And so let's do a little practice where we'll have it be an internal practice for the ease of the environment that we're in and so forth. But you can imagine doing a practice like this standing in nature as opposed to doing this practice. In fact, if you have access to the video of this conversation on on your portable device, you might want to just go and get into a really beautiful natural place where there's trees or mountains or rivers or oceans or waterfalls or fields of flowers or whatever it is that you prefer or have access to to do this little practice that is based on the three treasures of the body, mind, spirit, the earth, the sky, and the life in between. And it goes like this. Turn your attention inward. I'll break out my gong and I'll just ring it occasionally because it helps to bring us back from other thoughts that we're having. So first we just center ourselves and say, yeah, let's really do a practice now. Turn your attention to your breath and notice the difference between a usual breath, which is for sustaining biological capacity, and a deeper breath, which enhances biological capacity, but also begins to have an influence on the nervous system and the mind. Then let's use our intention to think about the forces of Earth. The Earth itself is a magnet. We know that it's a magnet because if we take out a compass, it reacts and everybody uses the compass and people learned how to sail around the world by using a compass. It's pretty reliable as a source of information. And that information source is an energy, call it a magnetic field. Think of that magnetic field being within you. It comes from the earth and it's within you every day. Every day since your conception, you have been under the influence of the magnetic field of the earth in the womb, throughout your childhood, and into your current life. See if you can have that be the focus now. At the presence of an invisible force, a magnetic force that is never not in you. And then bring your attention to the fact that that force is associated with the yin, and that the yin is substantial, and that the body is substantial. Thus, the body is the yin part of ourselves, and everything to do with the body, the blood, the digestive function, all associated with the biological aspect of ourself. And then we're going to bring our attention to the sky. The yang, Y-A-N-G, yang, boundlessness. If the body is associated with the earth and it is bounded, what is the aspect of ourself which is not bounded? How much attention do we ever pay to the part of ourself which has no time boundary? Call that the eternal or immortal self, and has no physical restraint. So where is the end of heaven? It's boundless. Scientists pretty much proven to themselves that there is no container. There is no end. Sometimes we call that the quantum aspect of being. Get a feeling for how there's an aspect of ourselves which is boundless, beyond what we can imagine. And then think of yin and yang, earth and boundless sky, merging in the center of our being. The organ that we feel is the most alike to the merging place of yin and yang is the heart. Get a feeling for, or imagine, or feel if you can, the eternal self merging with the physical self in the heart, which is associated with emotions, intelligence, intuition. We know that there's probably something calling you to be less focused on what we're doing than doing it. But see if you can let's go 2 deep breaths. See if you can sustain the focus on the idea that the body and the transcendental self, call it the spirit, merge in the center of the physical self, which is known as the heart or heart-mind. And just get a feeling for that. 2 deep breaths, 2 gongs. Let's have 1 more gong just because we wanted to have 3 treasures be the focus. 3rd gong. Think it through yourself. How do you want to do it? That's one of the deep, rich secrets of Qigong practice and cultivating your relationship with your true self is to be able to decide, how am I going to focus during this next gong? Which of the 3 treasures am I focusing on? Am I focusing on all of the treasures together? Am I focusing on how the heaven energy and the earth energy merge within the heart and mind? Your choice. Use your intelligence, your focus, your mental capacity, your feeling self to make that decision. 1 more gong. Something like that.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. Thank you, Dr. Roger Jahnke, for sharing that profundity with us.
You are so welcome.
It'd be rather lovely now to go into the track that you've chosen. But first of all, how can people find out more about you and where can they go to?
Sure. Well, our website for the Institute of Integral Qigong and Tai Chi, of which I am the director, is iiqtc.org. iiqtc.org. And I'm on Facebook, and you can find me there. You can find me through Messenger on Facebook. If you want to go to our conversation page at Facebook, it's called Tai Chi and Qigong Way. So head on over to Tai Chi, 2 words, CHI being the Chi word there, Tai Chi and QIGONG Way. And, make your declarations and chime in on the conversations. This is like a new page that we've been developing for a little bit. And I'm sure that you will support a couple of other websites when we put up this video. So I'll put a couple of my personal website, which is called Feel the Chi QI, feelthechiqi.com. And then I work with the Healer Within Foundation, which is a very powerful nonprofit that brings Qigong and Tai Chi to populations that wouldn't be able to have access otherwise. The Healer Within Foundation is healerwithinfoundation.org.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for creating that opening to share.
Well, thank you for sharing so much of your wisdom with us here on Chi Time.
You are most welcome. We can do it again sometime. We have to keep meeting like this.
We do. What is the track that you have chosen for listeners, and why have you chosen it?
The music track? Yeah, it's a tune from someone named Deuter or Deuter, D-E-U-T-E-R, I think it is, or might be D-U-E-T-E-R. And it's called Love Song from Mountains. And it has a beautiful flute track. But what's more beautiful than that is the arhu. Arhu being that vertical violin that the Chinese play that has that haunting sound. And the reason why mountains, of course, is that when we go up towards heaven, we are typically separated from shopping centers and highways and so forth. And most of the indigenous cultures have a reverence for mountains. And then the reason why love song is because the definition of love in the Chinese language is not sexualized. It's got to do with just deep appreciation. And so a love song from the mountains is basically a love song about acceptance, forgiveness. When you listen to this music, you can hear a kind of like, almost like a, I don't want to say sobbing, when someone is shedding tears because they are so deeply touched by whatever it is that's deeply touching them. That's what I sense that this love is. It's a beautiful song.
Beautiful. Thank you once again, Dr. Jahnke, for being part of Chi Time. May the Chi be with you.
My pleasure. Many blessings. Wish you well. Yeah. Take care.